Thank you for tuning into Literary Blend, a publishing podcast. I'm your host, Demi Michelle Schwartz. There's no perfect recipe for chasing a dream in the publishing industry, but I hope the conversations on this show give you the ingredients you need to bake yours into reality. So let's flip the page and get into this chapter of Literary Blend. Hi friends, welcome back to Literary Blend. Today's chapter is called Horror from a Mortician's Perspective. I'm so excited for this one. Join me on the show to chat all about this is one of my Asian siblings. Please welcome Victoria L. Bilstein. Hi, Victoria.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited that we are Asian siblings now.
Yes,
It's been a lot of fun getting
too.
to know you.
Yeah, you too. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. What about you?
I'm great. I'm really excited to chat about this. I'm so interested. I'm just going to be sitting here listening to you share all your golden advice and things. But before we get into chatting about horror, I would love for you to share with everyone a little about yourself and your journey in publishing.
Yeah, so I'm a funeral director and embalmer based in the Midwest. I've been practicing for about 5 years now, and I've been writing for a very long time. I started when I was 14. And when I was in mortuary school, I actually started to pivot a little bit more to including my industry in my writing. And I just had a ton of fun with it and I kept rolling with it. Right now, I primarily write cozy fantasy with horror elements and cozy horror. For me, that's just been a lot of fun. I think with my kind of death and dying theme heavy work, I think it just makes hopefully the subject matter feel a little bit more accessible and approachable for audiences. That's kind of my goal. And right now, I'm agented and dealing with all the fun submission process things. Just hoping to get a book out there in the world.
Fingers crossed for you. Really hope it works out. I love your book ideas, so
Oh, thank you so much. And you too. I am cheering so hard on the sidelines.
thank you. So, I would love to first, before we get into a bunch of specifics, I think it's really interesting how you've started to bring your career into your writing, but also I'm sure you've observed a lot of things just as a reader, what you think people do right, what you think people can improve on. So, just from your perspective with the industry you work in, bringing that into your writing, what initially compelled you to make that transition, and what are some of your biggest observations, both as a writer and a reader, over the past few years?
Yeah, so that's a really fun question, and I really like it a lot. So what initially kind of took me towards making the jump to bringing my industry into my writing a little bit more, I would say mainly my experiences as a woman in mortuary science. Where I'm at in the Midwest, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes. And when I was getting started, it was a little bit isolating. And I kind of turned to writing for comfort. It was really fun to bring some of those scenarios into the writing and to kind of explore them in a space that just felt really safe and comfortable. And especially being in an industry where some weeks can be really tough and you're seeing some really tough things and you're dealing with some tougher subjects. It's certainly nice just to have an outlet to explore that creatively. So I don't feel like I'm holding on to everything. For me, especially, it's just been a really nice way to kind of delve into that. When it comes to stories that I read, and kind of like how I interpret things as, a funeral director and what I'm seeing on a day to day basis. I think the hardest thing is we kind of think we know what death looks like. And that's hard because there's so much media out there that's portraying things a certain way when you look at like TV and movies. So we think we have that baseline understanding, but sometimes it doesn't look that way. And for me, I really like to see some realistic elements kind of starting to go into the writing because I feel like, then we can connect more to it. We can understand it a little bit more. And for our readers who unfortunately might have experiences in those areas, I just really want them to feel understood and that their experiences have been done justice.
Yeah, no, really great start with all of that. I think the realism is so important, especially when handling something like death. And I know you're passionate about research and accurate representations of things. So, can you share your tips and tricks and things when it comes to research and how authors who are including these kinds of scenes in their books, how they can make that as realistic and respectful as possible?
Yeah, so a super fun question, and I'll try not to get like too nerdy about it.
All the nerd.
Like,
Come on, let's go. Nerdy, nerdy. The more
I'll
nerdy, the better.
you're gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, she's going off on a tangent here." But so readers is fun. I think inherently as writers, we're used to doing it and we do it a lot. So, like, if you're writing historical, you're looking up, period accurate clothing and slang. How are people doing their hair? And that feels very natural. And I think when it comes to the topic of death, it can be a little bit more intimidating because you're like, where do I start? Or we might not feel fully comfortable starting to go, into that deep dive. But kind of like a couple areas that I kind of break it down for with writers when I'm beta reading a scene and they're asking me how can I make this more realistic. Kind of one of the big ones is science and anatomy, and I know that can be seem like a little bit broad, but if you're writing a particular scene, don't be afraid to kind of do a deep dive into the anatomy that might be involved in that. Like, what kind of bones might I be referencing? What kind of muscle groups, what kind of organs would be involved in the scene? What would they look like? And of course, depending on your genre, there's a level of detail you may or may not do if you're writing, young adult versus adult. But even the most basic understanding, I think, can take us into that scene and ground us a little bit more in reality. And as far as the science behind death, I think a lot of the depictions we see in media is, this very peaceful, someone might just be sleeping. Unfortunately, that's not always the reality. And, there's time factors. How do things change over time? So don't be afraid to kind of look into the science of that. If you're, let's say, writing a thriller book and maybe you have a scene where your characters kind of stumble across a body, maybe it's like a found situation. Do a little bit of research about decomposition. You don't have to include everything, of course, but it might add some really interesting elements to that scene. A nonfiction book I would recommend to everybody, and it's definitely a hallmark for a lot of death care professionals. I think we've all read it at some point. I know that we literally have a copy in our funeral home just sitting around. We have like no books, but we have it. But that's Stiff by Mary Roach. And I think it's really comprehensive and it's just a nice little, at least you can dip your toes into it and look at a lot of different areas of death. So that's a great little research tool to start if you're curious.
Yeah, a lot of great information again. Oh my goodness, I love that. I really like how you mention as well to think about your genre too. Are you writing for is it like a darker fantasy or are you going full blown horror? Are you writing for young adults, adults? There's going to be a difference. Like I write and read mostly young adult and there are some books that go pretty dark and a lot of mine are dark too, but you still need to keep in mind that if you're writing for YA, your target audience is high school kids. So, like, you don't want it to be too over the top. And if you're including details that are on the darkest side, gory side, whatever, I think it's so important to be realistic because I feel like now kids get so much information from books. And so if you're portraying things inaccurately, that could actually do harm. And I think the research also extends to I think the grief process too. Like I've researched so much stuff about like the grief process and stuff like that when characters are going through loss and things because I've read books, not necessarily like published ones, but sometimes when I'm editing for Amethyst Ink clients and there could be a death or some kind of discovery of a body or something and the reactions just don't seem to line up, and it feels more for the entertainment, not necessarily portraying the character's emotions in an accurate way. And I think especially that's really important when when you're having characters experiencing things, stumbling upon things, going through things. It's really important to portray that accurately as well.
No, that is so important, and especially like you said with audiences, this might be their first exposure to some of those subjects. And I think as writers, it's definitely our duty to put them first and to make sure we're doing things tastefully and we're doing it accurately. And grief can be such a hard thing to tackle in fiction, and just making sure that it's realistic and that readers can find understanding in it is so important. And so I love that. I love that so much.
Perfect. So the next thing I want to explore with you is how I feel like some readers and just people in general with the state of the world, it's easy to get desensitized to things. And especially with books, I feel like it's important to not, especially as writers. So, what are your thoughts on avoiding the desensitization? That's such a hard word to say. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, how
Yes.
would you avoid that?
So, literally same. I'm probably not going to say it right, but this is a topic I feel very passionately about, and I love to talk about it because as funeral directors and embalmers, that's kind of like the number one thing we're always fighting against is that over time we don't want to become desensitized towards what we're seeing because we're seeing a lot of it. And a common trap that a lot of funeral directors can kind of fall into over time is when we become used to something, we become desensitized to it and we forget, when we're meeting with a family, this is the first time they're going through that. And it's really important for us just to always put that first. And it's such like an interesting concept that transfers so well over to horror. um I kind of a great example that comes to mind. So my embalming bestie, my funeral director, best friend, loves to read horror too. So we talk about it a lot. And we were like, it was a weekend shift, and we were kind of going over our favorite horror books, kind of going down the list of what we had explored recently. And I brought up this one book, and I was like, it's so odd because I have a really high threshold and I can finish a lot of books. But for whatever reason, I had to shut this. I just couldn't get through it. And she was like, no way, because I also read that. She had found it on a recommendation list on Reddit, and she couldn't finish it either. And as a writer, like it really intrigued me what specifically about this book was so challenging for us, even though we have such a high threshold. And kind of the conclusion I reached was that in this particular book, it was, depicting some vile acts, kind of just for the purpose of depicting vile acts. So it wasn't necessarily giving a lesson or introducing themes or saying anything in particular to the reader. Some of it was just kind of gross to be gross. And that's okay because that's what some horror does. And I think all books, are inherently valuable with what they share for us. But with my experience as an embalmer, that just wasn't my cup of tea and it didn't work for me. And I really wanted to kind of try and apply that to my own writing. So, kind of the process that I go through is I always have to be able to answer why. So why do I have this particular scene in my book? And if I can't explain how does this help the characterization, how does this build on the theme or the atmosphere, how does this progress the plot, then I take it out because the odds are I might just be being gross, unfortunately, for the sake of being gross. And especially with the themes that I work with, it is common for me to have at least a little bit of body horror in my stories. And that's where the why for me becomes really important. So I think that's a great way to kind of ground yourself and make sure you're not becoming desensitized and taking the emotion out of the writing.
I love that so much. I think asking why is important for no matter what you're writing. This is something that comes up so often when I'm plotting my books, revising my books, working with clients too. If there's something in a story and I, as a reader or as I'm plotting, can't answer why, there has to either be some kind of change made to make it justified or cut it out. I think sometimes as authors, there are things in our books and stories that we just want to include just because we think it's cool or fits the vibes or whatever, but there needs to be an answer for why. And this is something I go back to so much, not just for what we're specifically talking about with horror, but anything, no matter what you're writing. I think that's definitely something that can apply to all kinds of stories.
Oh, I love that so much. It's so fun when something can be so comprehensive.
Yeah, for sure. So, aside from writing characters that feel real and have clear emotions and realistic reactions to things, what are other ways that writers who are writing horror and other darker genres can build empathy and enhance the reader connection to the character?
Oh, I love this question so much. I think this is such a fun question. Um, so I feel like I definitely, with my profession, I kind of have kind of a non-traditional outlook sometimes on the horror genre. And for me personally, one reason that I love it so much and I feel so connected to it, and it's kind of a juxtaposition, it might sound a little bit silly, but I think inherently there's some thread of comfort in every horror story. And kind of what I mean by that is when we look at horror, there's usually something that the writer is trying to tell the reader. And maybe they're focusing really intensely on a specific emotion, like anger or grief. Or maybe they're doing some criticism of society and showing why something might be unfair and why there might be a certain population that might be suffering from that. Um, and they're putting a lens on something. And as a reader, when you can understand that and you can go, oh, I'm not the only one who has ever felt this angry. And the way that they approach this, I really understand that. And I think that can be inherently comforting just to feel understood. And what's so special about the horror genre is it really gives you free reign to explore what is most of the time tougher subjects that I think can be harder to approach in other genres. So it's just special that we can turn a lens and a closer look at something that, could be isolating, but we shine a light on it and it doesn't feel isolating anymore.
Yeah, that's great. I think that kind of goes back to what we were saying before about asking why. Not just why you're including something specific in the book, but why you writing the story in general. I think that it's important to have an answer to that and to be writing with purpose. Sure, fiction is for entertainment, but every story I write, there's a theme woven through that. It's not hitting the reader over the head with it, but it's there based on my character and their arc and what they experience emotionally and all of that. So, knowing why you're writing a story is super important as a whole.
Oh, I love that so much. No, I'm a nerd about themes, so I love that.
Perfect. So, just to start winding down on our chat, what are some final thoughts you would love to share about the horror genre in general?
Yeah, so I think if I had to like pick my favorite thing about the horror genre, is I think it's a really inherently kind of a vulnerable and human genre. Like we're just really given this really awesome tool just to really dissect what makes us human and to kind of just go really deep into some of these ideas that otherwise can be a little bit intimidating to explore. And the other thing I love about the horror genre so much is the audience, because when they pick up a horror book, they know that we're going to be a little bit weird and we're going to be a little bit odd and we might be a little bit off the walls, but they trust us anyways. And they want to go on that journey with us regardless. So that I think that's just really special and there's a unique relationship with the book and the audience.
Yeah, I love that so much. I primarily write thrillers, but I've written a lot of horror short stories. That's probably my favorite genre to write for short stories. And for the new book that I'm going to start drafting soon, it's a gothic thriller, and there's a ton of horror elements in that. And I just think it's really fun. Like, I've loved horror for a long time, but now I'm dipping my toes into that more as a writer, and that's super fun.
Oh my gosh, yay. I'm going to be like begging you to let me beta read. Be like, give it to me.
Perfect. So, this brings us to the plot twist, where I get to ask you a random question you couldn't have seen coming. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm so excited.
So, at the time of recording this, Artemis 2 is on its journey to the moon, and this inspired this question. So, I'm going to list 3 space-ish things, and I want you to pair each of them with a subgenre of horror, like supernatural
Ooh,
horror, folk horror, whatever. Are you
ooh,
ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so your 3 things are the moon, the Big Dipper, and Mars.
Ooh, this is a fun mix. I like it. I like it. Ooh, where do I want to go with this? Um, for Mars, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna say paranormal.
Oh, that's
I
good.
feel I feel like there's something really inherently spooky about thinking about other planets because you're like, what's going on up there? And it's fun to think about, but it's also a little bit scary.
Yeah.
So the Big Dipper. I don't know. I'm gonna say gothic. I feel like that makes me think about like being outside, like in the woods by a manor, and you're like staring up at the sky. So I'll go ahead and go with gothic for that one. Ooh, the moon. This is a little bit challenging. Okay, I feel like these things don't really fit together, but I'm gonna say like pink bubblegum horror. Like I don't
So good.
find like a really fun like feminist approach to the moon. I don't know.
No, it's so good.
Oh, love
Amazing.
that.
NASA, you should hit Victoria.
Yes, hit me up, NASA.
Oh my goodness. Well, this was so much fun. Can you please share with everybody where they can connect with you online?
Yes. So I am active on Instagram, Victoria Bilstein Writes. And then I also tend to pop into Twitter and Blue Sky from time to time. So I would love to meet you guys on any of those platforms to connect. That would be a ton of fun.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I loved chatting with you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was a ton of fun.
Definitely was. Listeners, that is a wrap on this chapter with Victoria all about horror. If you enjoyed our conversation, please consider leaving Literary Blend a review and giving it 5 stars to help others just like you discover. Also, if you have friends in publishing you think would enjoy the show too, please pass it along to them. Thanks for listening, and until we flip to the next chapter, happy reading and writing.